The Flower Communion is one of the unique and one of the most loved of our Unitarian Universalist tradition. And it was created by Reverend Dr. Norbert Čapek, who founded the Unitarian Church in Czechoslovakia. And he introduced this special service on June 1923. And in my notes for the last few years when I've done it, I always said it was June 4th, 1923. I did some research this week. June 4th, 1923 was a Monday. So I don't think that's when it happened. But I mean, traditionally he would do it the first Sunday in June. So I think we're close. It's the 100th anniversary. That's still special, you know. So Norbert Čapek first met his wife Maya, who was Czech-born, in New York City while he was studying for his PhD. And it was her urging, Maya's urging, that he left the Baptist church and became a Unitarian while he was in the United States. And can you show the photo now of Norbert and Maya? I think it's good to put faces with these people. Now, I think he looks like a really happy, jolly fellow. She looks a little bit stern, I think. But she was a wonderful person, as you'll hear lately. But that's Norbert and Maya Čapek. Norbert developed the Flower Communion. And Maya, as you'll hear, brought it to the United States. And the Čapeks returned to Czechoslovakia in 1923, and they established this dynamic liberal church in Prague. And at one stage in 1941, it had 3,200 members, and was the largest Unitarian church in the world. And when the Čapeks first started the church, Norbert felt he needed some symbolic ritual that would bind people closer together. I think that's something many of us can relate to after 2 or possibly 3 years of the pandemic, still feeling like, how can we connect with one another? And for Norbert Čapek, he had to be careful, because in this Prague church, the format had to be one that wouldn't alienate many of his members. So you can see like Unitarian churches are the same throughout the world. And the traditional Christian communion with bread and wine was unacceptable to many of the members of his congregation because of a strong reaction against the Catholic faith. So he turned to the native beauty of the countryside for elements of a communion that would be genuine to them, the members of his congregation. And this simple service was the result. It was such a success the first time he held it in 1923 that he held it every year, the first Sunday in June, before the summer recess. Now, the Flower Communion from that church was actually brought to the United States by Maya Čapek, his wife. And it was during her tour of the United States that she first introduced it to the church in Cambridge, the Unitarian Church in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And unfortunately, this was 1940, so Maya was not able to return to Czechoslovakia due to the Second World War, and Czechoslovakia had been invaded by the Nazi Germany at that time. So she remained in the United States until the end of the war, only to return to Czechoslovakia to find out that her husband, Norbert Čapek, who developed the Flower Communion, had been imprisoned in Dachau by the Nazis and executed there. He had been sheltering refugees and Jews from Nazi Germany. And I think it's a great reminder the price that many of our forefathers and foremothers bared for our free religion and in the service of humanity. So let us take a moment of silence now to remember all of those who resisted the Nazis during the Second World War and who continue to resist totalitarian regimes throughout the world. May their memories bless and inspire us in our own actions. And from the beginning, the Flower Communion has spread to many Unitarian Universalist churches including ours. And it's been adapted along the way. What we're about to engage in is probably not exactly the same as was done 100 years ago in Prague. Each of us brings our own unique twist and evolution of this ritual. You were all asked to bring a flower of your choice, and if you still haven't, it's not too late to come and get one if you haven't got one. Now that flower may be one from your garden, it may be a wildflower, it may be a flower from your neighbour's garden, or your favourite grocery store. It's a flower of your choice that you bring to this community. And the flower you will receive later in this ceremony is a flower someone else brought as a gift to you. And that symbolizes the gifts all of us receive from this religious community and all of us bring to this religious community to create the vibrant, flourishing, nurturing community we have here. It also symbolizes the gift of grace we receive regularly from one another as we engage with this religious community. We'll now begin the flower ceremony by giving of flowers. Communion. Communion is a bond that unites us with each other and with the divine that carries within each of us. Our Unitarian tradition has this idea of the divine spark, the divine flame within every one of us. And communion is also an act of radical interdependence. Not independence, radical interdependence. We created this, and it would not have been the same without the contribution of every one of us here. And the significance of the flower communion is just like this: no two flowers are alike, no two people are alike, and we all bring our similarities and our differences to this religious community, and that's what we encourage, that's what we appreciate, and that's what makes this religious community what it is today. And together we create this beautiful bouquet of people represented by this bouquet of flowers. By exchanging flowers later, we'll symbolically show our willingness to walk together and trust in each other as another act of radical interdependence. Each person gives and receives a flower, thus celebrating that sharing of communion together. And that communion is essential to the practice of free religion amongst free people. I'm now going to give a blessing of our bouquet of flowers. And these words are the words of Reverend Dr. Norbert Čapek. And it's the translations of the words he used in his consecration on the flower communion in the Prague church 100 years ago. And consecration, just so you know, means dedication to a deity or higher power. Infinite Spirit of life, we ask thy blessing on these thy messengers of fellowship and love. May they remind us, amid the diversities of knowledge and of gifts, to be one in desire and affection and devotion to thy holy will. May they also remind us of the value of comradeship, of doing and sharing alike. May we cherish friendship as one of thy most precious gifts. May we not let awareness of another's talents discourage us or sully our relationship. But may we realize whatever we can do, great or small, the efforts of all of us are needed to do thy work in the world. Amen. Now I have the time for all ages. And I want you to try and imagine when I was a little boy. I know it takes some imagination. Last month's theme was creativity, so imagine me being small. Imagine me being in elementary school. I was back in Scotland in elementary school. We always had this tradition at each year that we'd get bulbs of different flowers. And, this was Scotland, so we didn't get a lot of choices. We got hyacinths or daffodils. Those were the two choices. So can we put up the photograph of the hyacinth and daffodils? So the daffodils, most of us are familiar with, that's on your left, and the hyacinths on the right. Now, most people love the hyacinths because they're different colors, they're pretty, and they smell gorgeous. I like the daffodils. Why did I like the daffodils? Well, you've got to remember, back in Scotland, we had a lot of snow. We had, where I grew up at least, and the ground would often be frozen. And you could always tell when spring was coming, because what was the first flower that would pop up? Daffodils. How did you know? And so the daffodils were always one of the first flowers we saw. And it was always this beautiful yellow colour that would just cover the landscape. And in Scotland, it's very green all year, but when the flowers popped up, because it was really barren most of the winter, most things hibernated during the winter. So the daffodils were the splash of colours that we'd get in the winter. And I like hyacinths too, don't get me wrong. I'm not getting into the dog-cat argument again. That's got me into trouble before. I like daffodils and I like hyacinths, but the daffodils were the first ones that would come up. But there's something else. Can you put up the second photograph of the daffodils? Something people don't often notice about the daffodils. If you look in that photograph, you don't often see it. You see the brown at the back. One of the things that daffodils do, they often have to come through frosted ground, hard ground. And so they have this hard shell that allows it to bloom first. And then once that shell reaches the sun, or in Scotland, the daylight, it actually starts to shrivel and die, but it doesn't drop off. It remains with the flower. So when people photograph, like the first photograph, you couldn't see those because you just saw all the yellow. But that brown piece there is part of that hard core. And I love that idea that it doesn't lose it. Because I think, if you use that as an analogy for human beings, we all have these fragile, precious, sensitive parts of us. But to go through life, we often need this kind of protective shell through the hardships, the struggles. We heard the losses and health struggles and the joys and sorrows earlier. So I love that idea with daffodils, that idea that we keep that shell with us as a reminder of the hardship, reminder of the persistence, reminder of the resilience that we have to get through hard times. And that's what allows the beauty to blossom. So I love that idea of really connecting with the daffodils, and I don't see any daffodils here. I looked for them in the store and I couldn't find any. But it's a brilliant flower because I remember that we all carry this hard shell, but we don't need to be defined by it.
If you were a flower, what flower would you be? A rose, a tulip, an iris perhaps, a daffodil? I don't even have to think about my answer to that question. If I were a flower, I would like to be a Gerber daisy. You can see them in my background right now. A large, colorful, bright flower with a sturdy stalk, a dark, strong center, and a brightly colored petals, announcing myself to the world. I have felt a kinship with this species of plant ever since I first laid eyes on it many years ago. These were the flowers I carried at my wedding. You can see me there, a much younger self with my flowers. These were the flowers that decorated my wedding cake. And about 10 years ago, I had a red Gerber daisy tattooed on my right shoulder. There is something about this flower that truly speaks to me. The way it is just a little too big and too bright, almost daring you to question if it really comes from nature. It isn't ashamed to take up space in the world. It declares, take a look at my strong, bright, beautiful self. Listen to what I have to say. I'm not shy. I'm not afraid. I speak my mind. I defy convention and stereotype. I'm not content to sit back in the bunch and keep my opinions to myself. I am going to make myself known. I'm also here to brighten up your day a bit. Give it a little color and shine. And check out my stem and leaves, nothing too delicate or flimsy. I bend with the wind, but not too much. I am strong enough to stand my ground. Okay, I know I have personified the heck out of this flower. I can't think of any other inanimate object that I feel this way about, which is probably a good thing. I have always been a bit outsized, a little too bright for my gender, wanting a little too much praise and attention. As a woman, I have often felt that society was trying to put me in my place. Be polite, don't ask for too much, don't be too loud, act like a lady. I've resented those stereotypes. As Johnny Castle says in one of my favorite movies, Dirty Dancing, nobody puts baby in a corner. And a Gerber or daisy just won't let you put it in a corner. It stands out in a bouquet. You know it is there. Maybe sometimes to some people, it's a little too much, too bright, too loud, too opinionated. But that sturdy stalk and those wide leaves stand tall against those criticisms, just like me.
Now I invite you to join me in the spirit of prayer. And this is the flower communion prayer that Reverend Dr. Norbert Čapek wrote for his flower communion in Prague 100 years ago. Now there's some gendered language in it, but out of respect to Norbert Čapek, I'm going to keep the gendered language in it, but I want to acknowledge that, given that it was reflection of his context. I invite you to join me in prayer. In the name of Providence, which implants in the seed the future of the tree, and in the hearts of men and women the longing for people living in love. In the name of the highest, in whom we move, and who makes the mother and father, the brother and sister, what they are. In the name of sages and great religious leaders who sacrificed their lives to hasten the coming of peace and justice. Let us renew our resolution sincerely to be real brothers and sisters, regardless of any kind of bar which estranges us from one another. In this holy resolution, may we be strengthened, knowing that we are God's family, that one spirit, the spirit of love, unites us, and may we endeavor for a more perfect and joyful life for each of us. Amen. And it's hard not to think of those words and how he died in the Nazi concentration camp. And yet, he had this beautiful hope of bringing more love into the world. We will now complete the flower ceremony by having the act of receiving it. And each of you are invited to come forward on the side aisle, as we did before. And then as you select a flower, and then as you meet in the middle, exchange the flower with the person from the opposite aisle. So this may be different than flower communions you've done in the past. I did this last year, but you probably don't remember. But the idea is that someone brought a flower, someone selects a flower, and someone gives you a flower. And that is a symbol of radical interdependence. And it's also a symbol of grace with which we are all blessed with this community. People bring many things, people share many things in this community, and we give and receive much from this community. So I invite you now to come forward, starting in the back pews, then the next row. Come forward, select a flower, meet in the middle, and we'll have to see how it works out. I noticed there was more in this side earlier, so if you see that this line's getting low, you can take a risk, go over the other side of the church. We're all friends here. And then can we focus on the table? And we see it's still beautiful. It's a little messy now, but beauty can be messy. I mean, look at this community. I'm glad you laughed at that. I was kind of borderline whether I should say that. But you see the beauty here. Yeah, it's a little disheveled, but there's still the beauty of flowers. And remember that beauty and messiness can often go together. As I said with the story of the daffodil earlier, you know, it kind of bursts through and it's got this withered core to it that shrivels for the flower to bloom. And sometimes that's what we need to do. And given the time and the congregational meeting, I want to remind you we all have the thrill and the beauty of a congregational meeting at noon today. I'm going to finish with the words of Elizabeth Strong. And I ask each of us to reflect, when you look at this flower, think, can we be tough enough, persistent enough, resilient enough to blossom into the beauty that's within us and manifest that to those outside? These are the words of Elizabeth Strong. The blooming season is short. The flowers stay only a brief time. We are travelers upon the earth, travelers to all too brief lifetimes. Therefore, let our moments be bountiful. Let us rejoice in our unique colors, aromas, and sounds. Let us celebrate together in love, that as we travel, we take with us the memory of golden hours together among the flowers.